Hey there, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jess with So Many Creations. In today's video, we are going to be making this adorable little train case. This is the Voyager Faux train case. I'll tell you why in just a second. And this was originally part of the Better Homes and Gardens Pack Your Bag series that I did back in 2020. This was in this issue right here, which was from summer of 2020. It is no longer in print, and it has been a very popular pattern that I have gotten a ton of requests for. I've been wanting to do a video on this for a while, and now it's finally time. So I'm going to walk you step by step through making this adorable little bag. So why do I call it a faux train case? Well, if you're used to, or if you are familiar with a train case, in the back, you would see a little strip right here, and that's how the top would open completely. So it kind of just opens up and flips down. This one is a little bit different. So it kind of has that look of a train case, works very similar, but it doesn't open completely. It's very similar to a boxy pouch. Essentially, that's what we're going to be doing today, adding a handle and doing it just a little bit differently from your normal boxy pouch. So instead of your zipper sitting like this on the top and being in the center, it's actually going to be sitting in the front. It's a fun little technique, a nice little, change up to a boxy pouch. Very simple, very easy to do, and beginner friendly. This one I did all out of cotton inside and cotton outside. This sample right here I did with cork, and I used one of our number 5 zippers. There's cotton on the inside of this one, and this one right here I did with some canvas on the outside. This is a cotton canvas. It's not super heavy, and it just has cotton on the inside again. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my supplies so I can show you everything you're going to need, which honestly is not that much stuff. You're going to need your outside fabric, cork, or canvas. You're going to need something for the inside. You're going to need a zipper and no hardware. Unless you count a zipper as hardware, which I don't think I do, that's all that you're going to need. All of your basic sewing supplies, your sewing machine, your thread, your presser foot. I'm going to be using 2 of them, and I'll go over those in the next part. And that's it. You don't even have anything that you'll need to download. You're just going to follow along in the video, and I'm going to give you a very simple screenshot of all of the pieces that you will cut and all the prep work you'll need to have done. So if you like videos like this, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, click the subscribe button, and hit the little notification bell. All right, let's get into it. Back in 2020, I was very lucky, and I was asked to do a series for Better Homes and Gardens for their Quilts and More magazine. This is the summer 2020 issue. This is what the cover looks like in case you have it. So inside here is the part 2. This was the second part in a 4-part series for the Pack Your Bags, and this is the toiletry case, or as I call it, the Voyager toiletry case or train case. So this is just a little, very simple, like I said, a boxy pouch kind of style, real easy to put together, and you don't need a lot of materials. So if you have your magazine, you can grab it. If not, it's totally fine. You don't need it. I'm going to go through the pieces that I have right here as well as the other supplies, and I'm also going to, on the next screen, just give you all of your pieces that you're going to need to cut and make it real easy for you. There's nothing to download. There's nothing that you have to go and grab for this aside from your supplies. So for the inside and the outside, you're going to need the same pieces, as in the same sizes. So I have chosen here for the inside a print. This is a cotton print. Now you will notice that this is directional, and I would highly recommend that you do not use directional fabric. You're going to see when I'm done that part of my print will be upside down inside. I don't mind. I thought it was really cute. It looked really nice with the polka dots, but if it bothers you, you'll definitely want to avoid anything directional. And by directional, I mean something like this, where there is a very obvious top and bottom. You're going to want to do something that doesn't have an obvious direction or no direction at all. Solids are fine for this, anything that you want to use. So I have for the inside and the outside, I have my pieces. So I have my larger pieces right here. These are going to measure 12 across by 15 high. My cork for the outside does not have any interfacing. If you are using something cotton on the outside, you're going to want to interface it. So you can use a canvas, you can use a quilter's cotton like I have here. If you are going to interface it, I would do a medium weight interfacing. I used a core bond. So I did go ahead and interface my lining piece. I did not interface the cork. I don't feel that you need it. I think it's sturdy enough without the interfacing, so I skipped that. So the prep work on this was actually very simple. So that's my larger piece. This is basically the base of the bag. And then for the top part, I have my 2 pieces here, which are again 12 inches wide and 8 inches high. I also have a handle. I'm using cork for my handle, so I cut mine at 2 inches by 12 inches long. If you would like to do this out of fabric, you're going to cut your strip 4 inches wide by 12 inches long. This is for the little handle on the top. And I also have my zipper here. This is a 14-inch zipper. You can use any style zipper that you like as long as you can sew over the ends. So for me, that means I don't do anything heavy plastic or metal. You can use a number 3 or a number 5 like I have here today. I thought the stripe would look kind of cute on the cork. And I also picked this little star pull that I had. I think it was a freebie. So just wanted to kind of, use some fun things. This is for me, so I wanted it to be happy and bright and pretty. So that's all that I have. I don't need any other supplies. My handle is not interfaced because again, it's cork. If you're doing cotton, you're going to want to interface your handle. Other than that, unless you want to add a handmade tag, there's really no other supplies that you need. So before I get into some of the extras, our thread, feet, all of that, let me just do the next screen here. That's going to give you all of your sizes. So if you want to pause, you can jot those down or get your cutting ready. Okay, so now that we have all of our pieces ready, the other supplies that I grabbed here is obviously my thread. I did pick something that would match the cork. I'm totally fine with this on the inside as well, so I'm going to wind a bobbin in this. This is Aurifil cotton in 40 weight. I have my scissors here. I did all of my cutting with my ruler and my rotary cutter and mat. I have my dish with my clips. And as far as feet are concerned, I am going to be making this on my Janome Skyline S9. So I am using my domestic machine because this is totally domestic friendly. I have my 2 feet that I use all the time, my O foot, which is my 1/4 inch with the guide, and my G foot, which is my blind hem foot with the guide in the center. That's how I'm going to top stitch my handle. So I have all of those, and I'll also grab a marking tool and a seam ripper in case I need it. Other than that, I'm ready to get started and make my handle. One quick thing I forgot to mention is I also have my E foot, which is my zipper foot. I'm going to show you how to do the 2 different style handles that you might want to do. For the fabric handle, I'm actually not going to sew this one because I'm going to use the cork one on today's bag. But in case you haven't made a handle before, it's actually very simple to do. I had my clips there while it was cooling from being pressed. So I have my 4-inch by 12-inch strip right here of cotton fabric. I did interface this with decor bond. What I'm going to do at the ironing board, or what I already did, is I pressed it down the center, interfacing sides together, pressed each of my edges in towards the center, and pressed it one more time. And now I have a handle that only has raw edges on the 2 short ends, and those are going to get sewn into seams, so that's totally fine. I have my open side and my folded side, and I'm going to top stitch both sides. This is why I love to use my G foot. This is the blind hem foot. It has the guide in the middle, so I'm going to move my needle to the far left position. I'm also going to increase my stitch length. I like to use a longer stitch length, so I'm probably going to go up to about 3.5. I'm just going to run this right along the edge here. It's right on the edge on the left side of the guide. And as I'm sewing, just like that, I'm going to get beautiful 1/8 inch top stitching. I would also do a 1/4 inch on this as well. I like to do both. And I have my canvas version right here. I did do the 1/8 and the 1/4 on both sides. That's just how I like it. You can do whatever you like. I always want to match my right and my left side though. So whatever I do on the right side, I do on the left side. That's just me. Some people just like to sew the open side, and that's just not a look that I really care for. I like to do both. So I did a double on this one, and on this one, I just did a single. So I just did the 1/8 inch on this. Now for the cork version that I have here, I folded my cork in half. So I just took this really simply and I just folded it in half like so. I have a folded edge here and I have a raw edge here. But for today, I'm going to do it a little bit differently. I'm going to make it so it's clean on both sides. So I'm going to move the cotton handle, and on my cork piece, which again is 2 inches by 12, I'm just going to use a pen and a ruler. And this happens to be a 1-inch ruler. I'm just going to mark down the center, just like that, and fold my edges in. That way I have seams in the middle that will be down, facing down when the bag is done, and I won't have to have one raw edge and one clean edge. So all I'm going to do is, either using some clips or some non-fusible tape, is just fold those edges over like that. Fold it over on this side as well. And when I take this to the machine, I'm going to stitch in a couple places. It's going to look a little bit different from my other handles. I'm going to stitch in the center, again, using this foot down each side so that I have the edges tacked down. So I'm going to do 1/8 of an inch from each of those. And then I'm also going to do 1/8 of an inch on each of the sides. So I'm going to go stitch my handle and I'll be right back. My handle is all set. I did my top stitching on each edge and also down the center because I did fold my cork edges in. So that is ready to go. I'm going to set this aside for now. I don't need it just yet. Next thing we're going to work on is the bottom half of the bag. So I'm going to grab my 2 larger pieces. These are my 12 by 15s. And I'm going to grab my zipper and also my clips, which I left over there. I'll be right back. All right, so I have my clips here. So the first thing that I'm going to do, I'm just going to slide my lining piece kind of out of the way. I don't need it just yet. I'm going to take my zipper and I'm going to place it right side down on my outside on one of these shorter edges. So just like this. Now I do have a longer zipper than what I need, and if it was even longer, that would be fine too, especially if you have anything metal, if you have a metal stopper, or like I have a metal pull. I want to keep that away from my machine. And personally, I like to be able to sew without having to open my zipper if that's possible. I just like to do it that way. That's why my zippers are usually longer than they need to be. And I'm just going to clip this. You can also pin if you would prefer, but since I'm using cork and I prefer clips, that's what I'm doing here. So I've got that clipped right sides together. So now before I take this to my machine, I'm going to add on my lining piece. Now my lining piece is directional, so I'm going to add it at the top part, but like I said before, it's going to be upside down on half of my bag because directional prints don't really work with this pattern. Partially, I did this to show you that, but also I don't really care and I think it's really cute, so don't judge me. So I'm putting my lining piece right sides together with my outside. That's going to be the same regardless if you have cork or canvas or whatever you have on the outside. And I'm just moving my clips so I can keep my zipper exactly where I want it, keep my pieces clipped together. So I'm going to take this to the machine and using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, I'm going to stitch right across here, making sure that I backstitch. I sewed my lining and my outside right sides together with my zipper sandwiched in between. The zipper is right sides together with the outside. I did use my zipper foot for this. If you are a Janome user and you have a 9mm machine, I am using the E foot and I move my needle position to 2.4 and then I put my regular stitch length on, which for me, with the cork and the thickness here, I do about 2.8. With those settings, I find that I get a really good 1/4 inch seam. If I line up the edge right here on the right-hand side, I get a really nice 1/4 inch seam when my needle hits on the left side. So if you're using another zipper foot or a different machine, you'll want to play around with those. You can even mark your seam if it's easier. Don't feel like that's, defeating anything. Sometimes sewing a zipper, especially with a certain seam allowance, can be a little challenging. So I went ahead and did that. I'm going to open this up, and instead of doing any top stitching right now, I'm going to save that for the end. Not the very end, but after I get this other part on. So I have this here. I can just kind of press that flat. I'm not even going to take this over and iron it and do anything. I'm just going to open that up and I'm going to add my next 2 pieces on. So these are my shorter pieces. These are my 12 wide by 8 high, and I'm going to do the same thing on this side of the zipper. I'm going to take my cork right side down. So my outsides are right sides together. Again, I'm just going to add a couple of clips here. Your outsides are always going to be right sides together. And I'm not sure why, but in all the years that I've been teaching, this next part is always the most challenging for people to kind of grasp. I don't really know why, but if we put our outside right sides together, we also want our linings right sides together. And a lot of times I will see students, whenever I'm teaching, put this lining piece completely on the wrong side or facing the wrong direction. Just remember that whatever you're doing with the outside, you're going to mimic with the lining. Outside's right sides together, lining is going to be right sides together. So again, because it doesn't matter with this directionality, it's going to do whatever it wants. I'm just putting them both right side up and I'm just letting whatever happens, happens. So I'm going to put this right up here. I'm sandwiching my zipper in the middle. I'm aligning my 12-inch side. Make sure my zipper is nice and straight. And if you're having an issue with this step, with the zipper part and getting it straight, you can always baste your zipper 1/8 of an inch to the outside and then add your lining and do your 1/4 of an inch. That's totally fine. I do that on a lot of bags, especially if I have a curved zipper. I don't usually on straight zippers, but again, it's totally fine to do that if it gives you the better desired outcome that you're looking for. So I have that all set. Grab my zipper foot, head back over to the machine, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 of an inch, again, all the way across, making sure I backstitch. Side 2 is all stitched. So now I'm going to go ahead and open this up. I'm going to open my lining, my outside. I'm going to flatten those out. I can take this over and iron it if I want. I'm probably not going to. I don't think I really need to. I'm just going to finger press, make sure everything is nice and flat. And now I'm going to do my top stitching. So when you do your top stitching, you're going to be going through both layers, your outside and your lining on each side of the zipper. So just make sure that that's how it looks on both sides. You have everything kind of flattened out. If you want, press it. If not, that's totally fine. I'm going to do about 1/8 of an inch. I think I'm just going to use my blind hem foot. Once I'm done with that, I will show you how to do the next step. Okay, so I top stitched my zipper. It's at just 1/8 of an inch. Go ahead and trim my little thread here. One thing to remember when you're top stitching, the reason that it's so important to get this really flat, and again, I didn't iron because I didn't really feel the need to, but you can if you want. You definitely would want to if you have cotton on the outside because they don't always want to lay as flat, is you don't want this part of the fabric, your lining, kind of rolling up and getting caught in your zipper. It's hard to see when you're sewing from the front side what's going on in the back. So just always make sure that it's pressed really well. So now that that's all set, we're going to go ahead and start closing up the bottom edges. So you're going to first open up your zipper. That's going to be real important for the finishing steps. So I'm just going to move my zipper pull into the center here. And then I'm going to take my cork pieces, right sides together, and my lining pieces, my fabric, right sides together. And I'm going to clip these. And at this point, it's probably feeling really similar to a boxy pouch, but it's going to look a little bit strange because the zipper is not dead center. That's kind of the difference in this project. So what we're doing here is the same step where we would be closing our edges, but it's just going to look a little bit wonky for now, but it's going to be really good in the end. So this is how it looks. It looks kind of crazy. It's not totally flat, but that's okay. So you're going to sew a 1/4 of an inch seam. I am going to use my regular 1/4 inch foot. You're going to sew all the way across on your outside, making sure you backstitch. And on your lining, you want to leave an opening. And I always say the bigger the opening, the better when it comes to bags, because if I have to turn something through an opening, I don't want a little opening, I want a big one. So I'm probably going to stitch maybe 1 inch, 1.5 inches on each side and leave a really big opening in the center here. I finished up my sewing. I sewed my outside pieces, which is my cork here. I sewed that a 1/4 of an inch. I backstitched on each end. This is the other 12-inch side, so this is the opposite of my zipper. You can see there's my zipper right there. On the lining, I did stitch just a little bit on each edge and I left an opening. As you may notice here, I did try to stitch all the way across here because I was not paying attention. I do it too, so don't worry, you are not alone. If you do happen to stitch all the way across here because you lost focus and you forgot, it's actually okay, and sometimes it works to your benefit. I will sometimes pull this out at the end, and then your fabric kind of perforates and it makes closing it up a little bit easier. So if you ever do it by accident, just tell yourself you did it on purpose to make it easier at the end. So now that that is all set, what we're going to do here is pull these seams in towards the zipper. So I'm going to start with the outside here with the cork. And I have not pressed anything. I am going to finger press my seam open. If you want to press, you are welcome to. I am not going to right now. And this is the open side of my zipper, so it's a little bit more challenging to work on. But what I'm going to do here is just pull that seam right towards the middle and add a clip. And then I'm going to pull this side over here, put that zipper right in the center lined up with the seam. And again, just put a little clip here. And then I'm going to come over here and do the same thing. This side's a little easier because it's closed. So I'm just going to, again, finger press that seam open and line it right up on my zipper like so. So I've got kind of a short edge here and then a longer side right here. Grab some clips and I'm just going to throw that like that. All right, and I will clip this open in just a second. I think it's a little bit easier to kind of start it and then do the lining side and then add some more clips, and I'll show you in just a second. So I'm going to do the same thing with my lining. I'm kind of flattening that out. I'm going to take my seam here, and I can also open this up, or I can push it to one side. I'm probably just going to push it to one side. I am lining up my seam with the bottom of the zipper. So it's the bottom center of the zipper teeth. And I'm going to put a clip right there and do the same thing over here. And if you find it easier, you can trim your zipper so it's even with the edge of your fabric, or you can trim it after you sew. It really does not matter. My clip, I gotta really get my clip in there. There we go. So just like that, I have it kind of flattened out. And I'm going to add a few more clips to these edges. This is going to look like an X. We're not squishing this down and sewing it together. We want kind of 4 different pieces right here, different sides. So I'm going to add a clip to each of these, just like that. I'm leaving the center clip together because for the sewing step next, it does not matter. And I'll show you where you're going to sew as soon as I get this clipped. So I'm just going to clip like that. Okay, so there's my X, and then I'm going to flip this over and do the same thing on this side, adding a couple clips to the short sides, adding some clips to these longer sides, and one more. There we go. So now that I'm all clipped in place, again, I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam. And for my sewing, I'm going to be starting on the outside. So let's just say the outside corner. Doesn't matter if it's the lining or the cork. You have 8 pieces to sew. You have 2 here, 2 here, 2 here, and 2 here. There's going to be 8 different seams that you're going to sew. So you're going to start at one of the outside corners, and you're going to work your way in and get as close to the zipper without touching it. If you can get right up next to the zipper tape, that is fine. If you can't quite get in that far, that is also fine. You just want to get as close as you possibly can. We're going to have an opening at the zipper, and that's going to be for the next step. So again, don't sew over the zipper. We're not sewing anything together. We have 8 separate seams that we're going to sew. I did all of my sides here. So as you can see, I stitched a 1/4 inch. Everything is still loose. They are not sewn together. And I got as close to the zipper as I possibly could. I did not touch even any part of the zipper tape at all when I was sewing on the lining or the outside. And that's what you want to do. We want to leave that open. And the reason is, for the next step, we're going to sew through all of these layers right here. So for a couple reasons, you want to leave the opening, and you want to leave it as small as you can. Number one, this is going to be a thick part that we have to sew through. It's going to be the thickest part that we'll really have to deal with for this bag or this style bag, but the least amount that I have to, the better. I'm going to be stitching through a few layers of fabric and interfacing, my cork, as well as my zipper. So I want to give my machine a break, especially when I'm using my domestic, and I just want to sew as little as possible. Also, the less that we sew here in the center, the more room there is on either side when we do our corners, and the corners are going to be the next step. So what you're going to do now, make sure everything is nice and flat. We've got our 2 bigger sides and our 2 smaller sides. We're just going to close up this gap that we have here. You're going to sew from wherever you stop stitching to wherever you stop stitching over here. So we're just going to be sewing from here all the way across to there. On both sides, we are sewing through all these layers. And double check, flip over when you're done sewing and make sure that you've connected everything. You might have gotten closer on this side than on this side, and you just want to make sure that you don't have any gaps or openings when you're done. I stitched up those little openings, so now there are no more gaps left. The only opening that you should have in your bag is this little one in the center for turning. So now that I have that done, I'm going to go ahead and trim my zipper ends off. I definitely don't need them now, and my zipper pull is inside. If your zipper pull for whatever reason is on the outside of your bag, you definitely want to fix that before you do any cutting, but your zipper pull should be somewhere in here. So now that that is all set, the next part is going to be to mark and cut our corners. So I'm going to grab a little bit bigger ruler. I don't know if this 1 inch is going to be big enough for me. And I'm going to grab my marking tool. So the corners that we're going to cut on this bag are going to be 2 inches. But because this is a boxy style bag, it's a little bit different than your regular bag. If you were cutting this from the bottom of another tote bag or a purse, you would probably have a seam on the side as well as the bottom. So you would be measuring just from your edge right here. But because this has a seam only on one side and a fold on the other, you're gonna measure your corners a little bit differently. So for our 2-inch corners, what we're gonna do is measure 2 inches from the fold, which is on the bottom, and from the seam. So technically you would be measuring 2 1/4 inches from this edge, or 2 inches from the seam and 2 from the bottom. And I'm just gonna mark. I prefer to cut my corners with scissors, and I also have another little trick that I'm gonna show you before I do any cutting. So I have my corner marked. I'm gonna go ahead and do all 8. Again, 2 inches from the fold at the bottom, 2 inches from the seam, or 2 1/4 from the side. Okay, so I have all of my corners marked. I marked all 4 corners on the outside as well as the lining side. And before I take my scissors, I'm going to head back over to the sewing machine and I'm gonna do a little bit of back stitching. And here's why. When I start cutting into this, that's gonna be fine. But when I cut over here, I'm actually cutting into a seam. And for the next step, I don't wanna pull these seams out and have another issue that I have to deal with, or, you know, kind of struggle as I'm trying to fix the corners. It's a little bit of an awkward bag as it is because it gets really 3-dimensional. So instead of having to worry about them ripping out, I'm just gonna go back over and just back stitch just a little bit on each of those seams just to make sure I don't have any problems. So it took me less than a minute and I just went and reinforced those seams. Doing that now is going to help a lot with the finishing steps and I'm not gonna have to worry about anything pulling out. So now that I have those all reinforced, I'm gonna use my scissors and cut all 8 corners. If you prefer to use a rotary cutter for this, you definitely can, but just be really careful when you get into the corner here. You don't want to overcut, and it's much easier to do that with a rotary cutter than it is with scissors. If you overcut, what's going to happen is you may have a tear in your fabric that's going to show later. So if you cut just a tiny little bit, it's fine. If you go too far, more than 1/4 inch into what's going to be a seam allowance, it's going to show and you're going to have a tear in your bag. And I think it actually takes me less time to do it with scissors than to grab my ruler and rotary cutter, get it all lined up. I actually just find this quicker and easier. And as far as those tiny little pieces are concerned, those little scrap corners, I have not yet found a lot to do with them, but if you have an idea, please leave it in the comments. Do you save these tiny little scraps and these little itty bitty pieces here? And if you save them, what do you do with them? Because I want to know. I've been asked that for years. So of course I feel guilty throwing them out, but I feel silly keeping them. Aside from 1 or 2 little pieces of this cork to maybe use as a zipper tab, I'm not really sure what else to do, especially with the fabric ones. So let me know if you have a use for them. Okay, so now I have all of my trimming done. This is how my piece looks. Kind of looks like a T. We went from an X to a T. So you're going to grab your clips and you're going to get this clipped and ready to sew. I'm going to start on the larger side. I'll show you what I'm going to do on the outside top, which is the smaller side, with my handle in just a minute. But I'm going to go ahead and get these 4 corners done. Now, here's another thing. If you find it easier to clip a corner, sew it, clip another corner, that's totally fine. I'm just going to clip 1 or 2 to show you how it looks, and then I'll go from there. Especially with smaller projects, sometimes it's actually easier just to do a little bit at a time instead of doing everything. So first thing I'm going to do before I even do that is I'm going to reach in here and unzip my zipper all the way. I think that that definitely helps. It gives me a little bit more room and flexibility here. So I'm going to be taking these inside edges right here, the inside of the corner, and flattening them out. Just like that. Just like any other corner that you would box on a bag. My seam is in the center, but I don't have anything to line it up with. So I'm just making sure that my edges are nice and flat, just like that. And you can see, because I reinforced that seam, I'm not worrying about that opening now. So that's how my corner is going to look. I'm going to do the same thing over here. So again, here's the corner that we cut while it's flat. I'm going to put my finger here and pull that. So now the seam should be in the center. And if your corner is a little bit off and it's not totally straight, that's fine. You can trim it. If it's off by a lot, double check your measurement. Sometimes it's easy to mismeasure and not even realize it. So that's how that's going to look. I'm going to do the same thing with these two corners. I'm probably going to do those as I'm sewing. But when it comes to the top here, so the top is the smaller part. Let me grab the finish bag. So here is my finish bag. This part down here is going to be this part, and this is going to be the top part. But I need to add my handle in, otherwise, why did I make it, right? So I'm going to grab my handle right here, and in this small section of cork, my outside, I'm going to put my handle through here, just like this. And I'm going to make my corner. I'm pushing the lining out of the way. And you can see, especially on the smaller side, it gets a little tight in here. That's why I try not to over sew the center part where the zipper is. So I'm going to straighten out my corner, just like this. And I'm putting my handle, I'm kind of hanging it over the edge just a little bit. And I have the seam facing up. So it's facing the flat part. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and add my clips, add a clip in the center, and add a clip in the center just like that. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to make sure that my handle is not twisted. Just kind of feeling in here. You don't want to twist your handle. And again, I'm going to do the same thing with this seam. So I'm going to kind of fold the lining out of the way, straighten out my corner. I'm going to add a clip here. Push my handle in. I let it hang out maybe about 1/4 of an inch or so, just to make sure that I can catch it and I can see it. I'm lining up the seam. The seam is facing towards the flat part, and the seam of the handle is in the center of that seam right there. A lot of use of the word seam. I'm going to clip that and then clip that. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this. Then I'm going to go ahead and do my lining, and then I will show you how it looks when it's all done and how you're going to turn it. So this is how it's looking so far. It looks like a mess, but I can assure you it's coming along just fine. But I just wanted to show you how that's looking. This is my top part. So there's my handle kind of sticking out. I stitched across there. I did reinforce a little bit over the handle, but nothing crazy, just a little bit of back stitching on each end. There is the bottom edge right there. So now I need to do the same thing with my lining. I just don't have to worry about adding a handle. A lot of this bag style, because of the way it's sewn together, is kind of just pulling things apart and moving things around. So that's why I really like to reinforce my seams, because I find that I'm pulling a lot more on this bag than I am in a lot of other bags. And I just don't want to rip out a seam, and then especially as I turn the bag, find out that I have a hole. So again, these little short edges are a little bit more difficult. I like to sew those first because then I get the hard ones out of the way, and the bigger ones I think are easier. I'm using a variety of clips because that's what I have. It doesn't really matter. If you want to pin this, you can. I would just much rather clip. I just don't really want to stab myself with pins. Plus, I don't think that they hold as well. I like the clips for this step. And that's really all I use when I'm making bags for the most part. So that's my bag. It doesn't look good, but I promise it's going to look real good very shortly. So I have 4 more corners I have to sew. Again, the only opening left should be this opening in the bottom. Sometimes people see it and scare themselves and think, oh no, I missed something. You did not. You still have to turn it. So I'm going to sew these 4 corners, and then we're going to turn this right side out. Okay, all the corners are sewn, all 8 of them. The only thing I have left to do is turn it, press it, and stitch up the lining. So I'm going to go ahead and turn. Whenever I'm turning a bag, I'm not reaching in and yanking and pulling really hard. I'm more peeling it back, kind of just doing it slowly. The worst noise to hear is a seam ripping as you're turning your bag. So I'm just gonna very slowly turn that, get my hand in here and poke my corners out. I'm also checking. I don't want to see any holes, but if I have one, I might as well know about it now. So I'm just kind of poking that out. That's looking good. Let's see how the top looks. All right, top looks good. And you can see My handle has the seam facing down. The nice side, the clean side is facing up. There's my seam right there. All right. And I can just kind of close or poke that in. The last thing I need to do is just close this. You can do that by hand. I don't do anything by hand. I'm just folding those edges under like that. Take this over to the machine, stitch it about 1/8 of an inch, and then I can tuck this in, and my little train case is done. All right, my lining is all stitched. I trimmed up all my threads. I double checked everything. Everything is looking good. Just so you can see here, there is that final seam. It's not down on the bottom of the bag. It's actually up here. And also my flowers are upside down because I use a directional print. I'm totally fine with it. It does not bother me at all. Next time I probably wouldn't do that, but I wanted to show you what would happen if you did. For the future, I will just stick with non-directional prints, but I just love this echinacea print and I wanted to use it. So I'm really excited. I love the striped zipper with the polka dots. And I did a silver zipper, but I did a little rainbow pull because that's what I had and I thought it looked really cute. So there is my little faux train case. Full disclosure, I'll tell you a little secret. I've never made a real train case. I've never made one of the train case patterns where the lid actually opens all the way. They kind of scare me. I know that I can do it. I've done even more challenging things than that, but for some reason, it's just one of those things that intimidates me, so I haven't made one. So I cannot wait to see how your Voyager train cases turn out, so feel free to tag me if you post them on social media. If you like videos like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, click the little notification bells, and give it a thumbs up. Thanks for joining me.